It was a Tuesday afternoon in Barcelona, and I was at home enjoying a rare moment of tranquility. The spring sun filtered through the windows, illuminating the living room with a golden light that made me feel at peace. I was sitting in my favorite chair, reading a book that I had put off for weeks, when suddenly the doorbell rang insistently. I got up with some annoyance, wondering who it could be. I wasn't expecting visitors, and Antonio, my husband, had a key. When I opened the door, I was paralyzed by surprise. There was Pilar, my mother-in-law, accompanied by 3 women who I vaguely recognized as her friends from the bridge club. "Surprise, dear," Pilar exclaimed with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "We've come to spend the afternoon with you." Before he could respond, the 4 women stormed into the house, leaving their bags and jackets on the coat rack in the entryway. My jaw dropped open, unable to process what was happening. Pilar had never been a loving mother-in-law, but this was completely unexpected. "Pilar, what a surprise," I finally managed to articulate. "I didn't know you'd come, especially with company." She looked at me with an expression that mixed condescension and expectation. "Well, dear, we thought it would be a good idea to stop by and say hello. And while we're here, why don't you make us something to eat? We're hungry after bridge." I was stunned by his demand. It was not a polite request, but a clear and direct demand. The other 3 women, whose names I didn't even remember, looked at me with the same expectation, as if it were the most natural thing in the world for me to serve them in my own home without prior notice. I'm sorry, Pilar," I began, trying to stay calm. "But I don't have anything prepared. Besides, I have other commitments this afternoon." Pilar's expression changed instantly. His forced smile turned into a grimace of disgust. "Commitments? What commitments can you have that are more important than taking care of your husband's mother?" I felt the blood rush to my cheeks. How dare he question my activities? I took a deep breath, reminding myself to maintain my composure. "I have a work video conference in half an hour," I explained, although I knew I didn't owe him an explanation. "And then I have to finish an urgent report. I'm sorry, but I really can't attend to you as you deserve." Pilar's friends exchanged disapproving glances, as if my refusal were a personal offense towards them. One of them, a woman with grey hair and gold-framed glasses, dared to comment, "Wow, Pilar, it seems like your daughter-in-law doesn't understand the importance of family." I felt anger rising inside me, but I restrained myself. I wasn't going to fall for his game. With all the calm I could muster, I addressed the 4 ladies. "I am very sorry that I cannot offer you the hospitality you expected. If you had told me in advance, I would have prepared something. But as I told you, I have unavoidable commitments. I suggest you go to the cafeteria on the corner. They make delicious cakes." Pilar looked at me as if I had just insulted her seriously. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment I thought he was going to explode. However, he restrained himself and with a cold voice said, "It's okay, dear. I see that you are not capable of taking care of your family properly. Antonio will be very disappointed when he finds out about this." His words hurt me more than I wanted to admit. Why did I always have to mention Antonio in our discussions? It was as if he constantly wanted to remind me that my position in the family depended exclusively on my marriage to his son. The 4 women headed toward the door, shooting me reproachful glances. As they left, I heard one of them murmur, "How inconsiderate. In my day, we would never have treated our mothers-in-law like that." I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, feeling my heart pounding. What had just happened? The surprise visit from Pilar and her friends had been like a tornado, leaving me confused and upset. I headed to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, trying to calm my nerves. I knew this wouldn't stay like this. Pilar was not one of those who easily forgot what she considered an affront. He would have to talk to Antonio about this, explain the situation to him before his mother filled his head with her distorted version of events. I looked at the clock and realized that my video conference was barely 10 minutes away. I took a deep breath, trying to regain my composure. I couldn't let this incident affect my work. I sat in front of the computer, trying to concentrate on the documents I had to review before the meeting. But as I read, I couldn't stop my mind from returning again and again to the scene I had just experienced. Why did Pilar hate me so much? What had I done to him to deserve that treatment? From the day Antonio introduced me as his girlfriend, she had been cold and distant. But this was a new level of hostility. I shook my head, trying to push those thoughts away. I had to concentrate on my work. I would have plenty of time to worry about the consequences of this incident. For now, all I could do was move on with my day and hope things didn't get worse. Little did I know at the time that that surprise visit from Pilar and her friends was just the beginning of a series of events that would test my marriage, my patience, and my own sanity. I had barely managed to concentrate on my video conference when I heard a crash coming from the entrance. My heart skipped a beat when I recognized Pilar's shrill voice. Had they returned? With my pulse racing, I apologized to my colleagues and paused the meeting. As I left my office, I came face to face with a surreal scene. Pilar and her 3 friends were in the living room again, but this time their faces showed a fury that I had never seen before. "Here you are, ungrateful," Pilar shouted, pointing an accusing finger at me. "How dare you throw us out of your house as if we were strangers?" I stood paralyzed, unable to process what was happening. The 4 women surrounded me, their eyes full of contempt and their voices rising in a chorus of accusations. "I never thought my son would marry someone so inconsiderate," Pilar continued, her voice shaking with rage. "Is this how you treat your family? Is this what your parents taught you?" I felt the blood boiling in my veins. How dare he mention my parents? I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Pilar, please," I began, trying to sound reasonable. "I already explained to you that I have work commitments. I can't just..." "Job," one of Pilar's friends interrupted me, a short, plump woman with hair dyed a bright red. "In my time, we women knew what our priorities were. Family always comes first." The others nodded vehemently, shooting me disapproving glances. I felt like I had stepped back in time, to a time when women had no say in their own lives. "Listen," I said, raising my voice to be heard over their disapproving murmurs. "I understand that you are upset, but this is my house and I have the right to decide how I spend my time. I ask that you please leave." My words seemed to add fuel to the fire. Pilar took a step towards me, her eyes shining with a mix of anger and triumph. "Your house, hiss. This house belongs to my son. You are nothing more than an upstart taking advantage of his kindness." I felt like I had been slapped. How could he say something like that? Antonio and I had worked hard to buy this house together. Every penny we had invested in it was the result of our joint effort. "That's not true, Pilar," I responded, struggling to maintain my composure. "Antonio and I. Antonio deserves better than you." Another of my friends interrupted me, a tall, thin woman with a pearl necklace that seemed too tight. A woman who knows how to treat her family, who does not put her work before her duties as a wife. The words hit me like daggers. Did they really think that being a good wife meant giving up my dreams and my career? That my only value lay in my ability to care for others? "You have no right to judge me," I said, feeling anger rising inside me. "They don't know me. They don't know anything about my relationship with Antonio." Pilar let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, dear, we know more than you think. We know that you are a selfish, cold woman who doesn't know how to make a man happy." His words left me breathless. "Where did you get those ideas from? Antonio and I had our problems, like any couple, but we were happy together. Or not." "You're useless," Pilar continued, emboldened by my silence. "A bad wife who doesn't even know how to cook a simple lunch for her family." The other women nodded, murmuring their agreement. I felt cornered, as if the walls of my own house were closing in on me. "I'm not..." I began, but my voice broke. Why did his words affect me so much? He knew they weren't true, but they still hurt. "Of course you are," interjected the 4th woman, who until now had remained silent. His voice was soft, but his words were laden with venom. "A woman who truly loves her husband knows how to take care of him and his family. You only think of yourself." I felt tears threatening to well up in my eyes. No, I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. I stood tall, facing them with all the dignity I could muster. "You have no right to talk to me like that," I said, my voice shaking with suppressed anger. "I ask you once again to leave my house." Pilar stared at me, a cruel smile spreading across her lips. And then, as if he had been waiting for this moment, he dropped the bomb. Antonio is going to divorce you and throw you out of this house. His words fell on me like a bucket of cold water. Divorce? Did Antonio want to divorce me? No, it couldn't be true. We had our problems, yes, but nothing serious enough to reach that extreme. Or yes. You're lying, I managed to say, although my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. Oh, dear, Pilar said, her voice heavy with false compassion. Do you really think my son will last much longer with a woman like you? A woman who doesn't know how to cook, who doesn't know how to take care of her family, who puts her work above everything else. I stood there, stunned, unable to process what I was hearing. Was it possible that Antonio was thinking of leaving me? Had I been so blind that I hadn't realized how unhappy I was? The four women looked at me with a mixture of triumph and pity. They had gotten away with it. They had managed to break my facade of security and plant the seed of doubt in my mind. You better start packing your things, one of them said, with a wicked smile. I don't think you have much time left in this house. I felt my legs give out. I needed to get out of there, get away from those women and their cruel words. Without saying anything else, I turned around and headed to my room, closing the door behind me. I fell onto the bed, feeling my entire world crumble around me. How had we gotten to this? How had a simple surprise visit turned into this nightmare? As I lay there, trying to control my breathing and the tears that threatened to overflow, I realized that this was just the beginning. Pilar and her friends had declared war, and I was alone on the battlefield. I stood in the room, shaking with indignation and shock. The words of Pilar and her friends resonated in my head like an endless echo. How dare they break into my house and attack me like that? Anger and confusion mixed inside me, creating a whirlwind of emotions that threatened to consume me. I took several deep breaths, trying to calm myself. I needed to think clearly, analyze the situation. Did Antonio really want to divorce me? No, it couldn't be true. We had our problems, like any couple, but nothing that serious. Pilar must have been lying, trying to manipulate me. I got out of bed and went to the window. From there, I had a perfect view of the backyard. To my surprise, I saw the four women gathered near the old oak tree. They spoke in low voices, with their heads together, as if they were conspiring. What are they up to now? I muttered to myself, squinting to see them better. Pilar gesticulated animatedly, while the others nodded enthusiastically. From time to time, one of them looked towards the house, as if afraid of being discovered. His behavior was strange, to say the least. Intrigued and increasingly apprehensive, I decided to take a closer look. I opened the window carefully, trying not to make any noise. The spring wind carried fragments of their conversation with it. It has to look real, I heard Pilar say. Antonio should not suspect anything. Anthony? What did he have to do with all this? My heart started beating faster. Something wasn't right. What if she finds out about us? Asked one of the friends, the one with the pearl necklace. Pilar gave a disdainful giggle. That fool. She wouldn't realize it even if we explained it to her with apples. I felt the blood boiling in my veins. How dare he talk about me like that? But my indignation soon gave way to concern. What were they planning? The women began to move, heading towards the house. Quickly, I closed the window and walked away. I didn't want them to know that I had been spying on them. I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind racing. Something was happening, something beyond the insults and threats. Pilar and her friends were up to something, and she had to find out what it was. With my heart pounding, I stood up and walked to the door. I opened it just a crack, enough to hear what was happening in the rest of the house. At first, I only heard silence. Then the soft murmur of voices coming from the floor below. I left the room cautiously, moving with silent steps down the hallway. The voices became clearer as I approached the stairs. I stopped at the top, listening. On the desk, Pilar said, "Make sure it's clearly visible." "And what about the photos?" another voice asked. "We will hide them in the last drawer. Antonio will find them when he looks for his documents." Photos? What photos? Confusion and fear took over me. What were they doing at Antonio's desk? With my heart in my throat, I walked down the stairs as quietly as I could. The voices came from Antonio's study, at the end of the hallway. The door was ajar, and a beam of light was projected on the dark floor. I approached cautiously, hugging the wall. When I reached the door, I held my breath and peeked through the crack. What I saw left me cold. Pilar and her friends were rummaging through Antonio's desk, opening drawers and moving papers. One of them held a large envelope, from which she took out what appeared to be photographs. "These are perfect," he said, showing them to Pilar. "No one will doubt its authenticity." Pilar nodded with an evil smile. "Excellent. Now, Carmela, put some in the nightstand drawer. And don't forget the hotel receipts." Hotel receipts? Photographs? My mind was spinning, trying to understand what was happening. And then, like a bolt of lightning, the realization hit me. They were planting false evidence. Evidence of an infidelity that had never occurred. Horror overwhelmed me. They wanted Antonio to believe that I was cheating on him. That's why Pilar had said she would divorce me. It wasn't true, but they planned to make it so. I covered my mouth with my hand to stifle a scream. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. How could they be so cruel? So manipulative? "Don't forget the hair," Pilar said, taking a small plastic bag out of her purse. "We will spread them on the pillow. Antonio will recognize them immediately." One of the women took the bag and headed towards the door. Quickly, I backed away and hid behind a curtain. I saw her pass by, heading to our room. My mind was working at full speed. I had to do something, stop them somehow. But how? They were 4 against 1, and if I confronted them directly, they would deny everything. I needed proof. With shaking hands, I took my phone out of my pocket. Maybe if I managed to record them, I would have something to defend myself with when Antonio got home. I activated the camera and carefully pointed it at the half-open studio door. Through the screen, I saw how Pilar and the other 2 women continued with their task. They placed compromising papers among Antonio's documents, they hid doctored photographs in strategic places, they even accidentally dropped a lipstick that wasn't mine next to the desk. "This will be enough," Pilar finally said, looking at her work with satisfaction. "When Antonio sees all this, he will have no choice but to throw out that harpy once and for all." The others nodded, smiling knowingly. I felt sick. How could they do something like that? How could they try to destroy a marriage like that? Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, the 4th woman returned from the room. "Everything ready upstairs," he reported. I left some blonde hair on the pillow and hid a pair of earrings in the nightstand drawer. Oh, and I left a forgotten love note between the pages of her book. Pilar applauded softly. "Perfect, girls. We have done an excellent job. Now we just have to wait for Antonio to get home and discover the truth about his beloved wife." The women chuckled, clearly satisfied with their plan. I, meanwhile, felt like the world was crashing down on me. How was I going to explain this to Antonio? Would you believe me if I told you that everything was a setup by your mother and her friends? With my heart pounding and my mind in a whirl, I retreated silently towards the stairs. I needed to think, plan my next move. One thing was clear, he couldn't let them get away with this. As I walked up the stairs, an idea began to form in my mind. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to turn this situation in my favor. But he would have to act quickly, before Pilar and her band of conspirators had the chance to do more damage. With renewed determination, I headed to my room. It was time to fight back. With my heart beating a mile an hour, I quietly returned to my room. I needed a plan, and I needed it now. Pilar and her friend's words echoed in my head, each syllable a reminder of the trap they were setting. I couldn't stand by while they destroyed my marriage. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. Think, I told myself. There had to be a way to stop them, to expose their lies before it was too late. Suddenly, an idea formed in my mind. It was risky, but it could work. If he could document his actions, he would have irrefutable proof of his plot. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone. The camera would be my ally in this unexpected battle. I approached the door and carefully opened it ajar. The hallway was quiet, but I could hear murmurings coming from the floor below. Pilar and her accomplices were still in the house, probably finalizing the details of their plan. With cautious steps, I slipped out of the room. Every creak in the floor made me hold my breath, afraid of being discovered. I descended the stairs with the stealth of a cat, hugging the wall to avoid the steps I knew squeaky. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I stopped and listened. The voices came from Antonio's studio. With my heart hammering in my chest, I approached the half-open door. Through the crack, I could see the 4 women still busy at their task. "Make sure that lingerie is clearly visible," Pilar was saying, holding up a red lace outfit that was definitely not mine. "I want it to be the first thing Antonio sees when he opens the closet." One of his friends, the one with dyed red hair, took the garment and placed it strategically in Antonio's closet. "Is this okay?" he asked, adjusting the angle so that it was impossible not to notice her. "Perfect," Pilar nodded with a malicious smile. "Now, Carmela, did you bring those love notes we wrote?" Carmela, the woman with the pearl necklace, took a sheaf of papers out of her purse. "Here they are. I've scented them to give them a more authentic touch." With shaky hands, I activated my phone's camera and started recording. Every movement, every word was recorded. I saw how they scattered the notes across Antonio's desk, how they hid them among his important documents, even how they put some in the pockets of their suits. "Don't forget the hair," Pilar reminded, taking out a small plastic bag. "Blonde, long, definitely not our dear daughter-in-law's." I watched, horrified, how they scattered the hair on the pillow of our bed, how they casually let it fall on the bathroom floor, even how they stuck it to the collar of one of Antonio's shirts. "And now, the final touch," Pilar announced with a triumphant gleam in her eyes. She took out a small bottle from her bag. Women's perfume. Expensive, seductive, and definitely not the kind that dead fly wears. She generously sprayed the perfume on several of Antonio's clothes, on the sheets of our bed, even on the back of his office chair. The sweet aroma filled the room, making me feel nauseous. While filming this surreal scene, I felt a mix of overwhelming emotions. Anger at his betrayal, fear at what could happen if his plan worked, and a fierce determination to not let myself be defeated. "Do you think he will believe it?" asked one of the women, who until now had remained silent. Pilar let out a cruel laugh. "Of course I do. Antonio has always been easy to manipulate. Besides, who wouldn't believe all this evidence? He's perfect." The other women laughed with her, clearly satisfied with her work. I felt my blood boiling. How could they be so evil? How could they want to destroy my marriage like this? I continued recording as they walked through the house, leaving evidence everywhere. An earring on the couch, a love note forgotten in a book in the living room, even a hotel receipt folded and accidentally stuffed into Antonio's jacket pocket. "This will be enough," Pilar finally declared, observing her work with satisfaction. "When Antonio gets home and sees all this, he will have no choice but to kick out that harpy once and for all." The others nodded, smiling knowingly. I felt like I was short of breath. How could they do something like that? How could they try to destroy a family like this? Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, Pilar took out her phone. "And now, the coup de grace," he said with an evil smile. "I have hired an actor to pose as our dear daughter-in-law's lover. He will call Antonio tonight, confessing everything and asking for forgiveness for stealing his wife." The other women gasped in admiration at this master plan. I felt like the world was coming down on me. This was much worse than he had imagined. Not only were they planting physical evidence, but they had also prepared false testimony. With my heart pounding and my hands shaking, I continued recording. Every detail, every word, every action was recorded on my phone. It was my only hope of unmasking this conspiracy. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the women began to gather their things. "Well, ladies, our work here is done," Pilar declared triumphantly. "Now we just have to wait for Antonio to get home and discover the truth about his beloved wife." I watched them leave the studio, laughing and congratulating each other on their perfect plan. I waited until I heard the front door close before I emerged from my hiding place. On shaky legs, I entered the studio. The scene that greeted me was devastating. Everywhere there was evidence of my supposed infidelity. Love notes, lingerie, women's perfume. All carefully placed for Antonio to discover. I dropped into Antonio's chair, feeling the weight of the situation on my shoulders. What was I going to do now? How could I fight this web of lies? I looked at my phone, where the recording was still active. At least he had proof of what had happened. But would it be enough? Would Antonio believe me if I showed him the video, or would he think it was another trick? With shaking hands, I stopped the recording and put it away in a safe place. Then, I made a decision. I couldn't sit idly by waiting for Antonio to arrive and discover this setup. I had to act, and I had to do it now. With my heart pounding, I stood up from Antonio's chair. Time was slipping through my fingers and I needed to act quickly. I looked around, taking in once again the crime scene that Pilar and her friends had orchestrated. Every object, every note, every article of clothing was a dagger aimed directly at my marriage. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. Think, I told myself. You need professional help. And then, like a ray of light in the darkness, the idea hit me: the police. They would know what to do in a situation like that, right? With shaking hands, I reached for my phone. I hesitated for a moment before dialing. What if they didn't believe me? What if they thought I was exaggerating? I shook my head, pushing those thoughts away. I had no other option. I dialed the emergency number and waited, holding my breath. Every hold tone was torture. Emergencies, how can I help you? The voice on the other end of the line was calm and professional. I need help, I began, my voice shaking slightly. My mother-in-law and her friends have entered my house. They have planted false evidence to make my husband believe that I am cheating on him. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. I could imagine the operator processing my strange complaint. Are you in immediate danger? He finally asked. No, they're gone, but they left all this here. Underwear that isn't mine, fake love notes, they even spread blonde hair all over the house. I have a video of them doing it all. The operator asked me for more details, my name, address, a description of what happened. With every word he spoke, he felt the situation becoming more and more surreal. How had we gotten to this? We'll send a patrol right away, the operator assured me. Please don't touch anything and wait for the officers to arrive. I thanked him for his help and hung up, feeling a little calmer. At least now she wasn't alone in this. I sat on the living room couch, staring at the door, waiting for the police to arrive. The minutes dragged like hours. Every sound startled me. What if Pilar and her friends came back? What if Antonio arrived before the police? I looked at my phone, debating whether I should call Antonio. Should I warn him about what was happening? But what if he didn't believe me? What if his mother's lies had already taken root in his mind? I decided to wait. I would talk to the police first. They would know what to do. The sound of a car stopping in front of the house brought me out of my thoughts. I jumped up and ran to the window. Relief washed over me when I saw the patrol car. I opened the door before they could ring the doorbell. 2 agents, a man and a woman, greeted me with serious expressions. Good afternoon, We are Agents Rodriguez and Gomez. We received a call about a possible break-in and falsification of evidence. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. Yes, please come in. I'll show you. I guided them through the house, showing them every piece of evidence planted by Pilar and her friends. I explained the situation to them as calmly as I could, although inside I was shaking. And I have a video, I added, pulling out my phone. I recorded them doing it all. The agents exchanged a look that I couldn't interpret. Did they believe me? Did they think I was crazy? Agent Gomez began in a soft voice. We understand that this is a difficult situation. Could you show us that video, please? With shaking hands, I played the video. I watched their faces as they watched Pilar and her friends scattering evidence throughout the house. Their expressions went from disbelief to surprise, and finally to indignation. This is pretty serious, Officer Rodriguez said when the video ended. You say these women are your mother-in-law and your friends? I nodded, feeling a knot in my stomach. Yes, they came this afternoon, demanding that I cook for them. When I refused, they became hostile and then, well, you've seen what they did. The agents took detailed notes, photographed the planted evidence, and asked me more questions. With each passing minute, I felt more emotionally exhausted. Agent Gomez finally said, "Based on what we've seen and your testimony, it appears we have a case of burglary and attempted fraud. Do you wish to file formal charges against these women?" The question took me by surprise. Press charges? Against Antonio's mother? For a moment, I hesitated. How would this affect my marriage? But then I remembered the cruelty of their actions, the coldness with which they had planned to destroy my life. "Yes," I replied firmly. "I want to present charges." The agents nodded and began to explain the process. He would have to go to the police station to make a formal statement, and he would probably have to testify if the case came to trial. "What about my husband?" I asked, suddenly worried. "He doesn't know anything about this. What do I say when I get home and see all this?" Agent Rodriguez looked at me sympathy. I would suggest that he was completely honest with him. Show the video, explain the situation. And if he needs support, do not hesitate to call us. I nodded, grateful for his advice. But still, fear persisted. What if Antonio did not believe me? What if he chose to believe his mother above me? While the agents finished collecting evidence and taking pictures, my mind spinning. How had we gotten to this point? How a simple visit had become this nightmare? "Mrs." The voice of Agent Gomez took me out of my thoughts. "We have finished for now. We will need to come to the police station to make a formal statement. Do you prefer to do it now or tomorrow morning?" I looked at the clock. Antonio would arrive at any time. "Tomorrow morning, if possible," I replied. "I need to talk to my husband first." The agents nodded. They gave me their card and assured me that they would patrol the area during the night, in case Pilar and her friends decided to return. When they finally left, I stayed alone in the house, surrounded by the false evidence of an infidelity that never happened. The silence was deafening. I sat on the couch, with the phone in my hand, discussing if I should call Antonio. Should I warn you? Prepare for what I was going to find? Finally, I decided to wait. I needed to see him face to face, show him the video, explain everything in person. I just expected me to believe myself, to trust me over his mother's lies. The sound of keys at the door startled me. Antonio was at home. The moment of truth had arrived. I got up, feeling as if I had the weight of the world on my shoulders. How would you explain all this? How could you understand the cruelty of your mother's actions? "Honey, I am at home," Antonio's voice echoed in the hall. I breathed deeply, preparing for the most difficult conversation of my life. It was time to face the storm. "I am in the living room, Antonio," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. "We have to talk. Something has happened, something terrible." While I waited for Antonio to enter the living room, I begged in silence that our love was strong enough to overcome this test. Because if it wasn't, Pilar would have won, and I would have lost everything I wanted most in the world. Antonio's sound approaching the living room seemed to resonate in my ears like thunder. My heart was beating so strong that I was afraid I could hear it. When he finally entered the room, his expression changed the fatigue of the workday to the concern to see my face. "What's up, honey? You look pale," he said, quickly approaching me. I opened my mouth to answer, but the words stuck in my throat. How to explain something so absurd, so cruel? At that time, the sound of sirens in the distance startled me. The patrols that the agents had promised to send were arriving. The confusion in Antonio's face deepened. "Are those police sirens? What is happening?" I took a deep breath. "Antonio, sit down, please. I have to tell you something and I need you to listen to me until the end." It was beginning to explain the events of the day when the doorbell rang. Antonio got up to open, but stopped him. "Wait, they are the police. I will open." When I opened the door, I found face to face with two uniformed officers. Behind them, for my horror, were Pilar and their 3 friends, handcuffs and with expressions that went from indignation to fear. "Good night, madam," said one of the officers. We have arrested these women based on their complaint and the evidence he provided. We need to formally identify suspects. I felt that the world revolved around me. Everything was happening too fast. I nodded mechanically and pointed to each of the women, confirming their identities. What the hell is happening here? Antonio's voice echoed behind me, full of confusion and alarm. I turned to see it, his face a mixture of emotions that I could not completely decipher. He looked at his mother, then to me, and again to the officers. Lord, one of the police began, his wife filed a complaint against these women for purple raid and falsification of evidence. We have videographic evidence of their actions. Antonio's expression was pure disbelief. Mom, what are they talking about? Pilar, who until then had maintained an outraged silence, exploded. Antonio, my son, do not believe anything they tell you. Your wife is a liar. We just wanted to help you see the truth. His words were like a dagger in my heart. Even now, trapped in her own trap, she kept trying to destroy me. Madam, he has the right to remain silent, one of the officers warned him. Everything he says can be used against him in court. Antonio seemed to be shocked. He turned to me, his eyes looking for answers. Please, explain to me what is happening. With a lump in my throat, I began to tell the events of the day. I told him about Pilar's surprise visit and her friends, her demands, her insults. And then, in a trembling voice, I explained what they had done later. They planted false evidence throughout the house. Antonio, I said, feeling the tears accumulate in my eyes. Underwear that is not mine, false love notes, even spread blonde hair for our bed. Everything to make you believe that I was cheating you. Antonio listened with an expression of growing horror. He looked at his mother, who had now adopted an expression of false innocence. Is this true, Mom? He asked, his voice just a whisper. Pilar began to cry, tears that now I knew they were as false as the evidence she had planted. Oh, Antonio, we just wanted to protect you. This woman does not deserve. One of the officers intervened. Lord, we have a video that shows these women by placing the false evidence at their home. His wife recorded it while it happened. Antonio nodded, as if he were trying to process all the information. He turned to me. Can I see that video? With trembling hands, I took my phone and reproduced the recording. I watched Antonio's face while watching his mother and friends spreading false evidence around our house, laughing and congratulating his plan. When the video ended, the silence in the room was deafening. Antonio was pale, his eyes fixed on the ground. Mom, said his voice broken by emotion. How could you do something like that? Pilar began to babble excuses, but Antonio interrupted her. No, I don't want to hear it. Officers, what will happen now? We will take the suspects to the police station to take a statement, said one of the police. His wife must appear tomorrow to formalize the complaint. After that, the case will go to the prosecutor. Antonio nodded mechanically. I understand. Thank you, officers. We observed in silence how the police took Pilar and her friends. Just before they put her in the patrol car, Pilar turned to us, her face a mask of fury and disappointment. Antonio, you can't allow this. I am your mother. Antonio did not respond. He simply closed the door and leaned against her, as if suddenly the whole weight of the world had fallen on her shoulders. We were silent for what seemed an eternity. Finally, Antonio looked up at me. His eyes were full of pain and confusion. Sorry, he said quietly. I'm so sorry. I never imagined that my mother would be able to something like that. I approached him and hugged him strongly. I felt how I trembled in my arms, and my own tears began to fall. It's not your fault, I whispered. You couldn't know. We stayed like this for a long time, hugged in silence, trying to process everything that had happened. When we finally separated, Antonio took my hand and looked me in the eye. We have to talk, he said. Above all this, about us, about the future. I nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and hope. Yes, we have a lot to talk about. While we headed to the living room, I realized that this day I had changed our lives forever. The path we had ahead would not be easy, but at least now the truth was exposed. The night extended before us, full of unanswered questions and difficult decisions to be made. But for the first time since all this began, I felt a ray of hope. Together, perhaps, we could overcome this. Antonio and I sat on the lounge couch, heavy silence among us. The house, which had always been our shelter, now felt like an abandoned battlefield. The evidence planted by Pilar and her friends was still spread everywhere, tangible reminders of the betrayal we had suffered. "I don't know where to start," Antonio finally said, his voice tired and full of pain. "All my life, I thought I knew my mother. And now, how could I do something like that?" I took his hand between mine, looking for the right words. "Sometimes, the people we believe they know us surprise us in the worst ways," I said gently. "But Antonio, this is not your fault. You couldn't know what she was able to do." He nodded slowly, but I could see that the fault kept weighing on his shoulders. "I should have seen it come," he murmured. "All those times that made derogatory comments about you, every time he tried to interfere in our decisions, he should have put a limit a long time ago." "Don't torture yourself like this," I said, pressing his hand. "The important thing is how we respond now. What do you want to do?" Antonio passed his free hand along his face, wearing more exhausted than he had ever seen. "Honestly, I don't know. A part of me wants to go to the police station right now and shout my mother for what she has done. Another part wants to disappear and forget that all this has happened." I understood perfectly how it felt. I was fighting with a storm of emotions: anger towards Pilar and her friends, fear for what this would mean for our future, and a deep sadness for the pain he saw in Antonio's eyes. "I think we need to take things easy," I suggested. "It has been a very long and stressful day for both. We might rest tonight and face all this with the clearest mind tomorrow." Antonio nodded, but then looked around with a grimace. "How are we supposed to rest with all these things everywhere?" He was right. The planted underwear, false notes, even scattered blonde hair. All this was a constant reminder of the betrayal we had suffered. "We could pick it up," I suggested. "Put it in a box and save it as evidence for the case. We don't have to see it anymore tonight." So that's what we did. In silence, we toured the house, collecting each piece of evidence that Pilar and her friends had left. It was a painful process, each object stabbed to the heart, a reminder of how close we had been losing everything. When we finish, we are again in the living room, a large cardboard box between us, full of lies and deceptions. "What are we going to do with my mother?" Antonio asked, his voice just a whisper. "Legally, I mean. Are we going to move on with the charges?" It was a difficult question, one that had been circling in my head since the police had taken it. On the one hand, what Pilar had done was unforgivable. He had tried to destroy our marriage, had entered our house and had planted false evidence. He deserved to face the consequences of his actions. On the other hand, it was Antonio's mother. Regardless of what he had done, he knew that a part of him would always love her. Could we live with the fault of sending it to jail? "I think that is a decision that we have to make together," I finally replied. "What your mother did was terrible, but I understand that this is complicated for you. Whatever we decide, I want us to be united in it." Antonio looked at me, his bright eyes with unabled tears. "Thank you," he said gently, "for being so comprehensive, not to press to make a decision right now. I don't know what I would do without you." I leaned down and kissed him gently. "We are together in this, Antonio. Whatever happens." We remained silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Antonio spoke again. "I think I need to talk to her," he said. "Before we make any decision about the charges, I need to look in our eyes and ask him why he did." I nodded, understanding your need for closure. "Do you want me to go with you?" He shook his head. "I think this is something I need to do alone. But thanks for offering you. When would you like to go?" I asked. "Tomorrow," he replied. "I will go early in the morning. Then, when I return, we will make a decision together on how to proceed." We agreed the plan and, emotionally and physically exhausted, we prepared to go to bed. While we got used, Antonio hugged me strongly. "I love you," he whispered in the dark. "All this sorry. I love you too," I replied. "And you have nothing to regret. We will overcome this together." The next morning, Antonio went to the police station early. I stayed at home, restless and anxious, waiting for his return. The hours seemed to crawl while imagining how the conversation between Antonio and his mother would be. Finally, shortly after noon, I heard the door open. Antonio entered, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "How was it?" I asked gently, guiding him towards the couch. He sighed deeply before responding. "It was difficult. Mom cried, apologized, said he just wanted the best for me. But he also admitted that what he did was wrong. He said he was willing to accept the consequences of his actions. I was surprised to hear that. I did not expect Pilar to admit his guilt so easily. What do you think?" I asked. Antonio passed a hand through his hair, clearly still processing everything. I think he needs help. Professional, I mean. His obsession to control my life, his irrational hatred towards you, is not healthy. I suggested that he would look for therapy, and surprisingly, he agreed. I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and caution. "And what about the charges?" "She said she would accept what we decided," Antonio replied. "But honestly, I don't know what is right here. What do you think?" I took a moment to carefully consider my answer. "I think what your mother did was terrible and deserves consequences. But I also believe in the possibility of redemption. If she is really regretful and willing to seek help, perhaps we could consider an alternative to jail. Perhaps some kind of community service or mandatory therapy." Antonio nodded. That sounds reasonable. We could talk to the prosecutor, see if there is any option like this. And, I added, I think we should establish clear limits with it from now on. Without surprise visits, without enduring our decisions. If you want to be part of our lives, you have to respect our marriage. "I agree," said Antonio, taking my hand. "Thank you for being so comprehensive in all this. I know it's not easy." I smiled gently. "I love you, Antonio. And part of loving someone is being there in difficult times. We will overcome this together." We embrace, aware that the road ahead would not be easy. We had many decisions to make, many difficult conversations ahead. But at that time, in the arms of the other, we feel a spark of hope. Together, we could overcome anything.